well. Wait, um,
Sharing right now? Yeah, I'm not. Okay,
sorry.
hello. Okay. What were you gonna say?
I was just thinking about well, the craftsmanship of putting together, like for instance, if this ends up being used in Vancouver,
Uh-huh.
that there's a way to put it together so it starts and has an intro and extra.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a
Yes.
yeah.
lot of little framing. I feel like I mean, the topics they're really it's really one of the things is like, for instance,
I'm going live on Facebook now. Is that cool?
Yeah.
that's fine.
Or do you want to wait till the end? We'll wait till we cover this first.
Well, I just wanted to say that each of these topics have their own body of work.
I know.
Thing is that it's really hard to just jump in and talk about things without kind of having that, like knowing, like not having those things contextualized so that it doesn't feel like you're like in the middle of a whirlwind, which I know, Monica, that you're like everything all at once, but I'm saying like I'm to me it's like, even like for instance, even if somebody like Ethan and Ryan were to watch what we're looking at, the people just will, I don't think that they'll understand what's going on essentially. So I feel like there's a curated way that we could even set up how it's presented, where like for instance you start with your albatross song or something, then you actually, we can, and then the questions and the setup, or that there's an actual setup where you're understanding why all of these culmination of things are coming together, and then each thing is kind of framed throughout. Like
So,
I'm
so,
saying, I'm talking about editing
yeah,
of like
That's
some
you know.
kind of script,
okay.
some
We
kind of
need to
script.
winnow it down. That's why it's a pilot, like we're piloting
Yes,
it so that we can get it right.
Right,
yeah,
it's a script. Ultimately, it falls in line when it's scripted. Okay, but right now
yes,
we're just bringing
yes.
the elements together, so to speak.
Yes, and I understand that. It's just that I keep thinking about it and I'm like, how is this going to be accessible truly to an audience? And I was like, it really does need to be curated so that we can make the alignment of these parts. And I feel like we're jumping in and we're doing it, but it would be nice to be able to, I mean,
Plan.
It,
I
it,
feel like what from what I'm learning is like we could literally do a podcast, Monica, and just like Jim could ask questions and we could literally go through a lot. There's a lot of things like, and they could be 30-minute components where you're actually exploring one thing at a time.
Yeah.
so our
That could
journey
happen.
map
Well,
and game plan and vision will give it structure,
True.
so we can put all of those real-time elements into those diagrams. Okay.
Right, but while you guys understand your diagrams and stuff, a person coming new to something don't understand even how you, like, for even I think that even a curated piece is, why does your design team create these, like the mapping, like all of it, it's
Right.
like it needs to be understood at the forefront so people can actually go into like seeing how you're even mapping things. That's like important too.
And that's what we will do.
yes,
Okay.
we could do
Okay,
ton of
that's exactly
symposiums
what we will
on
do.
that. Just that, just that design process. I was thinking
Yes.
that I think we're all on this.
Like I'm saying, that is, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I think we're all on the same page because today I was trying to like structure and get an agenda, get the right pieces to cover. And then Jim's like, well, you got to think of this as an evolving situation. Like, you're not going to get it
Right.
all. There's too much to get in this one program. So we're just
But another thing
laying
too
this
is like even,
foundation to even work from. Like, at least we have a body of work now to sift and winnow from and winnow down a good program. for
But
launch.
Madeline has just landed on the order and the
Yeah.
necessity to put it into something contextual so people can
And
follow along.
and even
Yes.
for example, let's say you have a quote that you want to share something that's in a song. I really feel like that it shouldn't be just quickly rushed over. You need to really say the quote, like read the quote very,
Right.
very, like, because even though you know it, other people need to be able to like hear the idea, and then we break down whatever it is the idea. And I feel like right now it's like you know how like when you're going through something and you understand it, but then everybody else doesn't, and you really didn't give them the time to have the same epiphany you had because you're really quickly going
Right.
through something. I'm saying everything needs to be very almost slowed down, and every quote needs to be like shared, and then maybe the breakdown
So,
of what it why how that connects to what you're asking
Ah,
essentially.
so, so when we do the final run,
Yes.
it will start with nothing but a blank screen. Okay, then it'll have the graphics and we'll actually be adding the stuff and working the stuff in real time.
Yes.
And that'll be the video
Okay. That's
because we'll be
great.
we'll be doing
Yeah, I know that there will be a method to the madness. I'm just saying at the moment, it's like I'm like, how are people going to understand being jumping in without, because everything's like most people don't even think about psychology as a part of
I'm gonna go ahead and go live because this is all part of what we do, design thinking and figuring out structure. So I'm just going live here.
okay.
let us know if we have any peoples.
And then you wrote something about Cassandra, and I don't know. I haven't even looked up the mythological background behind that, so maybe you can break down that. And I know
Yeah,
that she,
I wanted to start kind of talking about that, but yeah, that's what.
Why don't you start there because that's new information and it's necessary to understand it in totality.
Okay. Hold on one sec. Just gonna go live. Timeline. Okay, so we are live now on Facebook.
Oh, good. So
Okay.
what's the breaking news on Cassandra's?
So yeah, I was thinking to start with Cassandra today because there in the okay, we were just Madeline, Jim, and I were kind of hashing through something that's really core to design thinking is getting good structure and getting like this is a flurry of information and knowledge, and neither Jim nor Madeline are as deeply versed in the way that the Taylor Swift Torture Poets Department connects like that body of work itself. Um, I'm sort of bringing forth this combination of connecting it to Madeline's work because I have listened to that album for like for the entire since it came out in April and read Madeline's book so deeply and worked to make those combinations and tell you guys a bit about how what I was up to along the way. But yet we're still in the throes of um like this is still a kind of overwhelming body of work. So we're trying to figure out when we go to Vancouver, something that we're interested in exploring, evolving this pilot program that connects Madeline's work this is part 2 of our conversation with Madeline Spencer, co-director of Placemaking US and author of Soul Making. And we are thinking about how do we possibly start to take all of this information and put it into a more curated program so that when we find a location in Vancouver that would be cool to broadcast and entertain Swifties with, and like a Q&A type situation, and hopefully a placemaking situation, how would we go about kind of presenting that, and how like, and so that's one of the things we're doing here. And we are always looking at our vision, game plan, and journey maps, trying to figure out, especially when something's been done, like if it's a project that's evolving already and people are coming into it without prior knowledge, you always want to map out like journey process. And like the background of this was the Detroit Eras Tour. And we initiated a pilot project here in Detroit at the Old Shillelagh with Rebel Nell, who is a social entrepreneurial jewelry designer, and the Swifty Suite project, which brings in Swifties for like a contest to be in a suite to see the Eras Tour. So we started this project then. So it already has like a kind of body of work generated around it. And then like people have said before that Taylor's new work, it's not really going to be understood by the general population anytime soon, that there's just so many deep themes going on. And she's also performing it live. So there's like an influx of a lot of new knowledge around even just understanding the book, and then what she's doing on stage. And then Madeline's work altogether is a whole other body of work that's deeply steeped in the themes that she explores in her poetry and all of that. So this board is available 24/7 for anyone to skim through and click on links, look at pictures. There's a board from our Eras Tour over here that people can go through. I've taken some of the lyrics of some of the songs we reference most and put them here, put them there. And then this Medium post here, it sort of goes through like a story, a theory of the story that she's telling, so that when you do listen to Tortured Poets, it makes more sense. And I've updated this to where the theories up top, but it just kind of gives you the characters, the images that she's working with, like thinking about the double nature of the album, that it's 2 albums, and then she's also dealing really deeply with themes of public and private. And she's coming out of a situation where her private, she had kind of pined for this person, like an unrequited love for like 10 years, and they always kept it secret because the public wouldn't accept it. And before she went into the relationship with Travis Kelce, an entire wing of her fan base sort of like launched a petition effort to cancel the relationship and cancel the man and like drive him away from the Swiftian brand. And it was really kind of like a Puritan kind of town situation where the town is, acting on the individual soul. And she plays a lot with that metaphor. There's a lot of issues going on around the sale of her masters, which she's kind of in her album reflecting on. And Cassandra is a song, and Cassandra's known, she's a Trojan priestess, known, in the Iliad and Agamemnon, and known as someone who was cursed by Apollo, the sun god Apollo, to give prophecies and never to be believed. So she's kind of a figure of our time for people who've been kind of blowing the whistle on things, or um, futurist. And I'd put a clip here from a publication called Sentinel Intelligence. Jessica Wildfire writes a lot about Cassandra syndrome. And so Taylor's kind of deep in that body. And then, and I've got covered in this about like the fan drive and the petitions, and the backfire effect is an interesting phenomenon going on, because um, what happens with an internet culture, and how does truth circulate in that culture, and how are we circulating knowledge, and the differences between the way that the Swifties acted toward her unrequited love and canceling it, and the way they act toward like shepherding her to a conformity, like stadium spectacle relationship with Travis Kelce, is really interesting study in perception and knowledge and internet cultures. And so I just want to give like a little background to the themes we're exploring, and there's a lot around gentrification and placemaking, like the Truman Show, and rooting a lot of her themes that she's exploring in, fake like is your environment home? Is it fake? Is it made for people who don't live there? Is it locally created? That has a lot to do with our cities and issues that they're going through. And then, of course, Madeline is the expert on how inner process, like I couldn't begin to express how many of her words, theories and concepts that she explores in soul making relate to the things that Taylor is exploring. So the convergence of those two bodies of work was the idea, simple idea, and needing to explore, like, how do we get on the same page and value that kind of concept, and also, circular economy type work, which is what we launched in Detroit around the Eras Tour pilot with the friendship bracelets. And are there ways that concerts in general can be more circular economy based and productive for communities, and be more locally tied, and so they're not connected to the more gentrifying forces, which they typically are in our environment anyways. So anyways, that's just I just wanted to address some of the overview of the story, and then the way that we're capturing the knowledge, and which is our own process. And I tend to maybe take for granted it's new to everyone, but we typically use a journey map, and then vision and game plan for, as we have these kind of conversations, how are we mapping them, and capturing new knowledge that comes up from the experience. So I'm gonna stop now. I went off. Is that
Yeah, that's great. So that's like you're sharing that the constellation of ideas that come up are all being mapped in onto this board as we go.
yes, yes, and for curation and whittling it down for some form of orchestration in Vancouver.
So you might want to show how a sticky note is generated.
Okay, and then we've got these stickies over here. You can do square, rectangle, circular. And then so Swifties could be engaged in the audience to generate new knowledge of their own theories, and what they think, what they learn from you, and what they learn from soul making and place making, onto what you know, like we'll map these in a better
Al-
way.
Also to ask questions.
Yeah. Ask questions through the mural. You can
Or-
draw like
and or add content.
you get the point. And then they can add their pictures, their concert experiences, anything, and then you've got kind of a live body of knowledge being generated in real time and curated as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. And last night, Jim said to mention about new knowledge around last night, and just thinking about how, like, one of the themes I was exploring in the essay was how curiosity, the curious child ever reviled, as she calls herself in like The Bolter. And the theme of curiosity really does go throughout her music, and not to do references that not everybody knows, but the theory of that essay was that, like, okay, you're the curious child, you gain all this knowledge while you're taking in insights and asking why in your environment all the time, and then you become like a Cassandra. So you're now a futurist of some kind, and your society then might not believe you or might think you're crazy or every other kind of thing that they might do. And there was this is a very heavy song, and I could play it actually right now if you wanted to hear it. Cassandra,
That sounds great.
you want to
Yeah.
hear it? Okay,
And then zoom in on the
on the lyric.
on the lyrics, yeah, so we
Okay.
can see them.
Okay, hold on.
What's the name of the song?
Cassandra.
Okay.
So it's based on the myth of the Trojan priestess, and
And as I recall, wasn't Apollo originally like in love with her, and
Yeah,
she was she for a time was like returned the love, but then at some point she changed her mind, and that's why he cursed her by making it so nobody believed her.
yes,
yes.
yes,
And she was the one who knew that the fall of Troy was going to happen with the Trojan horse, and um
yes,
but was not listened to.
was not listened to. And um okay, so
So she's saying, "Are you listening now?"
yeah, that
Yeah.
the song was the hold on one sec. Can you hear it?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
I
Okay,
don't
the
think
song was she sang it live last night for the first time, and that's
Oh,
why
really?
it's kind of interesting as new knowledge right now.
All right, we can hear it now.
When the first stone's
Okay, hold-
thrown, they're screaming. In the streets, there's a raging riot. When it's burn the bitch, they're shrieking. When the truth comes out, it's quiet. So they killed Cassandra first, 'cause she feared the worst and tried to tell the town. So they filled my cell with snakes, I regret to say. Do you believe me now? I was in my tower weaving nightmares, twisting all my smiles into snarls. They say what doesn't kill you makes you aware. What happens if it becomes who you are? So they killed Cassandra first, 'cause she feared the worst and tried to tell the town. So they set my life in flames, I regret to say. Do you believe me now? said nothing. Blood's thick, but nothing like a payroll. That they never spared a prayer for my soul. You can mark my words that I said it first. In a morning warning, no one heard. I patched up the crack along the wall. I pass it and lose track of what I'm saying. 'Cause that's where I was when I lost it all. So they killed Cassandra first, 'cause she feared the worst and tried to tell the town. So they filled my cell with snakes, I regret to say. Do you believe me now? I was on to something. They all said nothing. Blood's thick, but nothing like a payroll. Bet they never spared a prayer for my soul. You can mark my words that I said it first. In a morning warning, no one heard. No one heard. Not a single word was heard. When the first stone's thrown, they're screaming. In the streets there's a raging riot. When it's burn the bitch, they're shrieking. When the truth comes out, it's quiet. It's so quiet.
Yeah.
So what was, tell me about, more about this with, in relation to your,
Yeah. So
Like
go over
to
to the
the
lyric.
story?
Go over to zoom in on the lyrics, Monica, so that you can work from something.
Or should I go into the essay I wrote about it, or?
yeah,
Or the what?
breakdown, share the breakdown of
Okay.
what it was that compelled your imagination regarding.
So I think it was that it became such a juicy story around the Masters and her calling out her family for the first time. Like everybody knows that she had a war going on with like Scooter Braun and Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. Um, but there's like these emails came out about around her dad and like showed the background of kind of like how he was dealing with situations. And I think that what she's saying in this song is that she sees the Masters sale kind of as a coordinated hit, and that the memory of that's still in her body, like when she's walking past the crack in the wall, it like floods back to her. So I think it's interesting, like related to your work, and that like how things trauma could get buried, or like, or the full story might not be, I mean, we're not walking around with the full story of who will become and what kind of obstacles we're going to encounter in the way. And when it came to like grifters and people that were attempting to steal her work, um like to put her dad kind of in that category is really interesting. And he there's a song in TTPD, it's called But Daddy I Love Him, and she's like that he also was intervening in her relationship with this person who actually was the inspiration of all of her songs. Like the thing that made the money itself, the value creation, she attributes like him as her like muse, and also a professor, like she learned about writing like from him. And so it's interesting in that way. And then just considering in general it as a metaphor about value creation in general.
So it sounds like the very first thing I heard you say is this kind of idea of like when she walks past the crack in the wall, then all of these things come back to her. And it reminded me of a text called "The Body Keeps Its Score."
Mm,
Embedded in our, I mean, a lot of things happen to people and they hold a lot of things, which is I mean, which is why we understand that trauma and such exists. And our, like, I believe our nerve cells are where our memories are held. So like we are often, like, we have ability somehow, I don't know why our minds can do this, but we can compartmentalize and hold things, and then all of a sudden it can come back up. That was the first thing that you reminded me of. But then the second thing is you're saying the value creation piece, which is like killing the, or what, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, like that they're trying to get rid of um the very thing that gives the creative energy
Right, right.
to the artist.
yeah.
And maybe you can you or Jim can share more about where that falls into some of your own things that you've seen with value creation.
Right. I was just making a note to myself. We need some video assets of Vancouver to
Mhm.
to pull the relational um, that is local, hyper local, into view as her show unfolds in Vancouver. I think that would be an interesting juxtaposition, is to actually be talking about placemaking as a vehicle for solving um, um, emotion, both storytelling and emotional connections. Um,
And just would you break down what does value creation mean to you?
well, it's really a simple concept. You know, the typical proposition in capitalism is I'm going to take some dollars, I'm going to spend them, and the resultant is all there is, whatever takes place. And that's worked kind of well for a couple of 100 years. Um, but we're at the end of that phase. We actually have to get more out of what we're spending. And placemaking is a great example of that. Um, I'm
Do you
going
think,
to
do you,
go
when
ahead.
you say we have to get more out of what we're spending, is that like, are you saying that's because of the fact that the way that we spend is like it doesn't, nature has this way of like recycling, or what is it called, where it has a natural way of balancing itself out, creating a kind of a ecological balance, but that human beings, we're very extractive, so we don't seem to have that balanced reciprocity between use and what happens. And a perfect example that actually that just reminded me, it's that I grew up in Montana, and there might be a season where we have tons of grasshoppers, and then that makes at the same time a larger amount of the animals that eat the grasshopper will be surrounding like the fields, etc. But there's this almost like thing that happens where everything balances itself out again.
And
There'll be more. Yes, go
and,
on.
and more so, oxygen,
Yeah.
osmosis. I mean, I can go on. Okay, we are currently um, residing on printable dollars to represent the value, and that's great. But at some point in time, you can't spend $200 million for a square foot of apartment space, and we've reached that place. We are there. And so the dollars have to be spent in a wizened fashion to generate additional value. It's not enough just to take the dollars and extractively use them in a capitalist fashion and they're gone. I'll just give you the national budget as an example of how bad that is. We're approaching, we can't pay it back ever. And this is what is really going to be realized over the next 4 years. We're going to spend another 8, 9, 10, 11 trillion dollars that we'll never be able to pay back.
Yeah.
And value creation addresses that by building into it, if that's a circulation proposition, or if that's a engaged citizenry proposition, or if that's a learned advantage that is acquired from additional knowledge being traded. I'll give you the education system that we currently employ. We can't afford it. We're now going to destroy it. Donald's all about, getting rid of the Department of Education. Not the fact that we're already 36th in the world, as a national disgrace, but competitively, how are we going to compete? We're certainly not going to compete on dollars.
And how does that impact, like, for example, your own city?
Right, it's a great question. It's a really great question. Detroit happens to be an example, in Pontiac more recently. Detroit happens to be an example of how that failure is exploding. If we just look at what's happening in the world of the automotive industry, and we look at our competitiveness as the automotive manufacturing capital of the world, we're not. We currently are not. And as the future's unfolding and EVs are being taken off the marketplace, we're not the future. And other whom, when we offshored everything, learned how to do what we do and have done, and they're actually better at it than we are.
Right. I hear like China as well as India are some of the rising superpowers, essentially.
We manufacture our cars in China, in Mexico. Now we're in a real rush to remanufacture and bring everything back to onshore. But when we offshored them in the 80s, those were $70 an hour jobs. They're $25 jobs now. When a person doesn't have to do the math too much there to go, that's not going to pencil. Because if they went off as $70 in the 80s and they came back as $25 in 2020, you can't live on $25 an hour work in the United States. Well, you can't live well.
Right. So what are some of the ways that you think value creation is going to like what are some of the changes we're going to have to make?
Well, I'll give you one real, what I call an easy example. We have an education system which is based on having built for a period of time called the industrial era. And it worked very well. But there is almost no return on that investment today in the industrialized, because we've moved from one of building things to one of dreaming things up. And yet our education system is still designed to produce for the industrial era. It's just an example of doing the wrong thing. And if we talk about curiosity, which is the essence of all learning, we got off the wrong track if we were building the system to design people to show up for an industrialized position and that position no longer exists. Then we have to change the way in which we're doing things. And we
And
don't build for curiosity, even though that's the natural learning component. We get rid of the natural learning component by third grade. We all know this. This isn't this. I haven't discovered anything. We all went through it, and so we all know this, and we were okay with it because it served a purpose. But it no longer serves a purpose.
and
It
Monica,
gets,
how I was
it,
just curious because
just let me just finish this one
oh,
thought.
sorry.
Okay, so now we have this curiosity, right?
Yes.
How much does that cost?
Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing. Think about it. The thing that's going to change the world is absolutely free. It's provided by God. And if you hadn't had the opportunity to go in amongst a group of kids and make them aware of this, let me tell you, it is magical. It is magical what happens. And after that, it's about what do they, in their discovered imaginations and in their discovered engagement, bring to the party. And I'll tell you, they've never disappointed. Never. And a great example of this, if you go into a elementary school, you're going to get off right away. You're gone. You go into junior high, what, are you asking me a question? Nobody's ever asked me a question my entire educational life. If you go into high school, you can forget about it. They have never been asked. They don't want to be asked. They're not interested. I'm telling you, it's over. So you got to get early. And that's what we're bringing to hopefully the state of Michigan. We've had some conversations with some of the seeming leadership from the governor on down. The governor, had a report. I think I've said this before. The governor had a report called "Growing Michigan Together," where she outed education. She made everyone aware that we're 42nd in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a few places that are worse, but not many. In a supposed place that is already providing a very rich return, namely the automotive industry. And of course, that's not true any longer. And in fact, they're voting with their feet. Nobody's interested in being in the automotive industry even. They're leaving the state. And that's why she wrote the report. She didn't really write the report because she was outing education. She wrote it because she was losing taxpayers.
Right.
We're an opt-out state, not an opt-in state. So the whole point in that conversation is to recognize that this is just the first outing of education for the wrong reason, but it outed it. And so now it's an issue. Now it is either going to be shelf life, the report's going to be shelf, a thing that sits on a shelf, or we're actually going to do something. And we've got just enough of an edge there with some of the leadership, with some of the state reps and people that we know to not let it get swept away. And we're in the throes of defining how we go about it without them. Because the likelihood that we're going to have that kind of impact is kind of remote. But you can do it right down at the local schoolhouse. And that's some of the other things that we're doing is working in that fashion. And strangely enough, the work that we were doing in Pontiac is now generating $200 million on behalf of the county. So we know it's not a question of money. It's really a question of going about the process. And it'll find its way in one fashion or another. Not because of the funding or not because anybody cared, but because the kids have agency. And agency is killer, okay? I mean, unless you want to be the other person going, I'm not paying any attention to you, kid. I wouldn't recommend it, okay? I wouldn't recommend that, but I I spent, 10 years, 20 years ago playing with kids to learn what I understood. And it kind of, at that time, um, they were capable in their agency of doing a demonstration for the Michigan Science Teachers Association. And the observatory that I was the director of was their locus. And they created a show along with the Detroit Zoo in Greenfield Village here, which was Henry Ford's Greenfield Village, historical. And they ran the show. And I got 112 engineers from EDS to support them technologically and hook them up from the observatory and the zoo and Henry Ford to downtown Detroit in half of the Renaissance ballroom at the Renaissance Center. And they ran the show. They opened the show, they ran the show, and they were the show. And that was Zooming before Zooming was Zooming. Okay, if you knew what we had to do with 112 engineers and laser trucks that had to run the signal to get it down to the hookup for fiber down to Detroit, and from the zoo over to Royal Oak to get down to Detroit, and from the observatory over to Pontiac, and you were actually shooting a laser and hitting a 3.5-foot target to get the signal. I mean, today we just Zoom, okay, because we have technology, but then you had to port it from one point to another. It all to have the kids be in the exhibits and be the conduit for imagination and creativity. And the teachers ran from the exhibit in Rensen, suggesting that they were losing their job, that this was going to take their jobs. And isn't it ironic? Some 30 years later, it has. And yet the kids are still left on the sidelines. This is what's really incredible. There they were the lead because they had the technology and they had the capacity and they weren't afraid. Today we have, well, fear and anxiety and a shrinkage of imaginations and held hostage imaginations and, well, no imagination at all. Just get the right answer. Okay.
I was gonna say we've seen with Taylor Swift's way of kind of getting away from a system that controlled, that she herself is an example of value creation in terms of like making sure that she owns the right to her own work, etc. And I see that Monica's been pulling a bunch of quotes. I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more about.
You just nailed it right there.
Yeah.
You just brought the whole thing, which is why you're soul making. Okay, this is like, it's a prophecy that's unfolding here. Okay, that's very powerful, very powerful.
And I think keep
Will you
talking 1
explain
second,
more?
and I'll play. What'd you say? Play more?
No, explain more about what she's done. That
Okay.
is an example of that for people. I mean, I feel like we've seen it in some other areas where there's kind of this deconstruction and reconstruction happening, even when it comes to these monopolies that have kind of controlled things. And we're talking about education here, but like these examples help on how we can like decenter these like archaic systems and
A lot of things.
Absolutely. You just like Jim says, you just nailed it.
well, what was nailed? What I'm saying is we understand it, but what is it that we see?
We have deconstructed it, and we recognize that it has new parameters that are unknown and yet exist. And it's no different than any other creative process is identifying an object of intention and then going about figuring out how to bring it into being. It's no different than that. And what's really amazing is we're finding ourselves in a time of total destruction. I mean, about everything you point at today is a deconstruction, a disaster, actually, either
But
in the making or happened.
so if education is like holding the old model of education is holding an embargo over us, and people are unable to get out. What is the example that Taylor Swift is given with her music that breaks out of that old control?
Well,
Well, that
go ahead. Go ahead.
to me in the essay that I wrote, and just the thinking that I had, like every time I would listen to it, I just kept it kept getting me curious about what's the story or what did that come from, um and over time, and I don't think this is general knowledge yet. um I mean, there's a lot of memes that get generated about it, like, like I'll just grab things and kind of curate them on, as I see them. But like this is a quote from her, and some Swiftie just put it together with school. And um but the way that she talks about curiosity, I just think is so deep, and she's telling us what happened in her life. Like, and they say that about, like, all mythology, and that they're like blueprints that are being given to things you'll meet throughout life, like the archetypes that you know so well, Madeline. And
Well,
so she, in the Robin song, that was kind of my theory, and that's the least listened to song of the entire album. And what I've kind of but when I first heard it, I kept listening to it over and over again. Like, it just was so interesting to me. And it turns out, in my theory, I can't say it's, common knowledge, or, it hasn't really been vetted. We're just kind of, this is the first time I've ever written it down and introducing it, and like kind of coming out even about how
So
much I'm obsessed
what's
with
the
this,
theory?
album. But the theory was that, okay, Robin is the bird, and these are the last words of Robin, and I'll play it for us too. I'll tell you first. But okay, in the movie The Secret Garden, the young girl who's the curious child ever reviled in that book and film, and she goes to her uncle who's, working in the farm, and there's this robin that's always around, and she's like, well, I haven't ever had any friends. And she becomes friends with this robin, and it leads her, the robin itself, like, she follows it, and it leads her to this secret garden. And then she's got like a key that she can get to the secret garden whenever she wants. And in the song I Hate It Here, which follows So High School, which is the song that, like, the Swiftie wing of her fan base that thinks she's in a beautiful relationship right now, like, they think So High School is a love song. And so in my theory, I kind of flip it, like, no, it's the most sarcastic song on the entire album, and it's not that at all. And then so she's in this kind of brute relationship, and in misogynistic NFL culture, and she's already had like AI images of her used as porn and circulated. Like, then there was a song called My Travie Made It to the Big Game, which went viral, and that was an AI song. And she kind of flipped the script. There's an interview of her before where she kind of talked about being inspired and where does inspiration come from. And she has a lot to say about AI. So she used the AI beat to make a song, The Alchemy, about Travis. And so that's funny. And then So High School is funny. But then in I Hate It Here, it's about the secret garden. And then back to Robin, which is the finale song. It's like a sister song to the Bolter. And the Bolter comes before Robin. And it's kind of predicting this relationship she's going to have with the Cad. And that's how she frames Travis, and as a trophy hunter. And so she's talking about this breakup, and she starts out by saying a curious child ever reviled in that song, and that how she almost drowned and whatever. And that's this song right here. And then next to it, this is the end of Robert, and she's saying, She had predicted in the Albatross that this is not going to go well for Travis, but he went ahead into it, shooting the messengers, and she tried to warn him this is a big game, and but he's like all in and making money. He's got New Heights. It's like the most popular podcast on Amazon, and he's just not a thinker. But Maddie Healy was a thinker, and he like over analyzed the relationship and left because it's like doesn't want to hurt her brand, and she knows that, and she's anyways. But then she'll say the time will arrive for the cruel and the mean. You'll learn to bounce back like your trampoline, but now will curtail your curiosity. So she's saying it is like for someone like him to be curious is a danger. And she knows that it's a danger for her. It's been a danger for her. And like she's comforting him as like someone who went through it and like you'll get through it. Like I just think it's kind of funny. But everybody in the Swiftie universe thinks that the song is written for a child and that has no connection at all to the entire story that's being woven, I think, and I see it as like there's a synthesis of the entire fragments, and we deal with holonomy all the time, and we're dealing with parts and wholes all the time, and that's how I experience the album personally, is that there's all of these fragments of the story, and then they kind of come together in a synthesis at the end with the last 7 songs, and then Robin's the last song before she does the manuscript. So to me, it's her most important song, and I'm shocked that most Swifties don't see it that way, but they see it as like this random song and how sweet it is for a child. But she's like flipping it and saying like, no, it's like for a man child.
So here's a couple of thoughts. One is her efforting has been about deconstruction. Once the capitalist system had closed out on her, she deconstructed. And what we're in the middle of right now is her reconstruction. It's really that simple. And her curiosity is the way in which she went about doing it. I mean, the creative element is what rewarded her curiosity, and that's what we're witnessing as an example. So to the value creation side of things, imagine anything that's disrupted like that, like education, for instance. We recognize that it needs to be deconstructed because it no longer fits the situation that we find ourselves in the world. And we know that we altered education to fit the industrial proposition. It wasn't like we're going to be dreaming things up. It was, you're going to be prepared to show up and do the same thing a few hundred times every day, and you're going to enjoy a middle-class life. Pretty simple. And we're not going to debate whether it was valuable or not. It created the middle class in one of the most dynamic countries in the world. But we've seen that show.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that Monica had sent me a quote from James Hillman, and it reminds me of it right now because when we're talking about deconstruction, one of the things that we learn is just like the postmodernist era, there was this moment where there's a break with kind of what they called the logocentric hierarchy, where there's and people like Derrida and all these folks started to break out of this. And James Hillman does the exact same thing when it comes to psychology, where he wrote this book called 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And he essentially told
Wow.
the world of psychotherapists, especially in the depth psychological tradition, like he's like, we need to get out of the clinical office and get back into the streets. He said people's libidinal energy are being brought into these office spaces and they're using it to get a catharsis, but then they're allowing their neighborhoods to fall apart. They're not they're not giving their energy at City Hall and telling them that things need to change. They come in and they explain all the problems that they have in their world, but then they're not actually aiming that energy of those problems into the fixes that need to be done. And he said, and we're psychotherapists are actually helping this to happen. And so he was saying, we need to get out of the clinical office and we need to go back in the streets. And that's
In
one
the
of
streets, exactly.
and
Oh my
that's one of
God.
the things. But
There's the
in the
closer. There's
Yeah,
the
what
closer
closer.
for Vancouver. There is the closer for Vancouver. Okay, so we know what our close looks like. Okay. If,
Yeah,
if,
but in this soul code, one of the things is he also talks about this. He gets away from, so there's this very unified individual like theory that Jung has, which he believes that there's this process of individuation, and he still believes in kind of this capital T truth kind of a organizing principle, whereas he says stick to the image, and he talks about this kind of teleological development where the acorn becomes the oak, and
Mm,
that we need to break out of looking to a looking to the past, or the way that therapists would work through childhood trauma. He
mm,
actually looks more at, look, from the very inception, there's like these guiding principles that are images, these images that come into our reality. And so when Monica was just talking about this, what it's this thing where like there's this, it's all there, and I was just trying to relate it to the idea of the school, like that the answers are actually in the whole process. Like it's saying, it says here, you're born with the character, it's given a gift, as the old stories say, from the guardians upon your birth. He
right,
believes that you are the essential image, and it develops, if it does, as Picasso said, I don't develop, I am. So
right.
this recognition of uh just that it's happening constantly, and it's developing constant, and it's being birthed constantly. And if we pay attention to what's coming up, and really, he has this term notitia, which is noticing.
Hmm.
And if you really pay attention and notice,
Hmm.
you can start to see what it is that's being said.
Mm. And,
Um,
and so the answer is in every third grade classroom.
yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But
That we can depend
unfortunately,
on. That we can depend on.
I feel like one of the things, it's funny because I was working in a third grade classroom on the side doing some work for a teacher, and I'll always remember that she had gone around to get a whole group of students responses to like how they were understanding a text. And but the thing was that the teacher had a framework in which you couldn't go too far from her framework in order to
Right.
share.
Right.
And I remember that in the class, each child had a different way of trying to understand or explain it. And one child had a father who he took him out boating. And so when he explained it, he explained the response in nautical terms, and it was comparing it. And she actually shut him down because she didn't understand what he was saying. And I remember afterwards going to the child outside of the classroom and just telling him that that was a brilliant answer,
There we
because
go.
he really did understand it, but he understood it the way that he saw, just like we all do. We understand it as we see.
Our
And
framing. Right.
yes, and the thing
Yes.
was that she didn't have the, like, almost the teacher didn't have
The bandwidth.
the bandwidth to
The bandwidth.
actually sink in and hear what was being said, and contextualize and understand how it did connect to what was being
She
shared.
was
And
she
that,
was she was teaching to the curriculum.
right.
It's a
And
it's very
also,
limited. It's very limited. All you need to do is be able to breathe. Okay. Really, nobody cares about the, but what are you grading? You're
well,
grading something that isn't very wide, but rather very narrow.
and there's no responsibility, because the response to the child is that you it's not even authentic, because they
Right,
can't hear what's being said in the classroom, which is the which is the new way, the
right.
new idea or the new concept. And I saw it with the smart board as well because it had just come out, and the kids understood the smart board, and the teacher would get very frustrated because they wanted to take on the like help the teacher to actually use the smart board,
Right.
but the teacher wouldn't allow them, really, because it would change and shift that role of power,
Hmm.
Yeah.
which it's
Yep.
interesting to me because it's that power role that they want to stay in control, that they forget how to be also a learner in the space with the children.
Well, they were
Yeah.
trained. They were trained, and that's what we have. Are the trainers.
The
And
trainer.
here you're dealing with the untrained. And the untrained just happens to be more dynamic than the trained. And it's pretty simple. I mean,
That is why
it's not handed out equally. I hate to say that, but it's not. And so when you get a group of third graders together, they're very good at figuring it out because all they want to do is move forward. And they'll be agreeable to do just that. And it doesn't fall on any one, it's the group. You're as good as the group. And the group can be quite good depending on the makeup of the group, or can be quite bad. But the point is, generally, when you get 10, 15 kids together, you've got the makings of the future
Yes.
at any level, at any school.
and
And
then
and yet I'll tell you that we marginalize every one of those. And when we get down to the lowest of the low, the idea is that there's no genius there. Totally wrong.
I remember also there's this thing called masters classes or meet the masters that they have at schools. It's kind of like where people who teach the arts come into schools and show them famous artists like Picasso, etc. But one of the ones that were a little bit different was they had an indigenous leader come in, and she would teach the kids about her, like just sharing all of these different things about their culture and
Right.
the ways and practices and different tools. And one of the things that would happen commonly was that a lot of kids, they would see things that they didn't understand and they would laugh. And she said that it wasn't until her son had come with her, her little child had come with her, and he said, "Mom, why are they laughing at our idea, like our culture and ideas, etc." And she said, I mean, she realized at that moment that she actually needed to create a lesson to teach them that actually they do not need to laugh. What they need to do is say, "Hmm," and actually think about, like,
Right.
instead, because laughter is oftentimes also a fear mechanism where people, if they don't understand something, they act out of fear. So she started this whole thing where anytime somebody would typically laugh, the room would just go, hmm, because they
Mm.
don't understand it yet,
That's
and they
right.
would
beautiful.
like to understand it. And it just that simple shift of like wonder helped everybody to start to question more about whatever the item or the equipment or the tool was that they didn't understand.
Mm. But let's face it, the
Wow.
indigenous people in America were doing a lot better job of making
Oh my
sense of the
God.
world around them than what followed. There's
That's
just no
true.
no question. They lived on behalf of the land, and it just and they
And
lived
what
in symphony with the
and
land.
watching this live dispossession of the Palestinian people is horrifying right now to me as well, with the indigenous knowledge that they have of that land and it all being wiped away. All that innovation and just
It's
I can't.
interesting because I was thinking, like, in philosophy, the Aristotle supposedly had another book that he was supposed to write, and a lot of our, the rational and Cartesian dualism and the mechanistic world that we've moved towards, there was this other text, which is more of that Native American, where they would sit, if they want to understand something, you would actually use this notatia of Tillman, like sit there and they would figure out why, for instance, bees come to this flower and what's being extracted, and understand everything around the world of the item to
Right.
make it understood, rather than the deductive reasoning where we tear apart the flower to try to understand its parts, and it doesn't give this holistic understanding or process.
You're on camera.
Wow.
And supposedly there's another book, and we just for centuries we have not gone into that kind of a system of understanding, which is required, and is kind of this connective tissue where
So,
that was just
so,
as
so,
important.
so,
Yeah.
so climate change is going to force that conversation.
Absolutely. It's
Absolutely.
forcing it now. The
Yes.
C40 cities and the woman who has created the circuit, what is the text? Kate Kate Rayworth, is that's her
Yes.
name?
Donut economics.
Yes, like
Yeah.
there's already places testing this out, and I love it. Civic Square is one of them in Europe, where at the neighborhood level, people are actually working through and creating it within their own neighborhoods.
That's part of our orchestration is donut economics on behalf of the community, because that's so important. We've lost sight of what's important. What we want to do is pay them off. What's wrong with that? We want to pay them off to be quiet when they contain the answers to the problem. But the capitalist system says, no, we'll give you $1.
We have
As opposed,
a participant here that we haven't met yet.
we do.
Oh,
Oh, good.
Is that, I see this person down here. I don't know. I didn't. Oh, wait, no, go ahead. Keep going.
Okay.
It was lined up. My video panel was lined up perfectly with like a Zoom picture in the board.
Oh,
okay.
I see.
And go like, oh my God, there's somebody here.
Well,
Carry on.
again, the world is speaking now, and it's having its way, and yet we still recognize that the idiots are playing in the aisleways. Um, these things are so large that they cannot be excused, and that will get the aisleways cleared rather quickly. No amount of money is going to change that dynamic, because the dynamics are so large that you can't buy your way away from them. And regardless of what Mr. Musk might imagine, or Mr. Bezos might imagine, or
That's
any of
why
the other crew might imagine.
that's one reason why it's important to have a bigger than life story of value creation going on in that realm as well.
Right. And again, I think that the education is the simplest and yet the most dynamic. I mean, it's free.
Yep.
You you can't get any better than free. Okay. And and and
But it also has to be celebrated, because when that kid was shut down that I was talking about, he thinks that he was not connected because
right,
that gatekeeper, which is a teacher, essentially didn't understand for themselves. So that openness, like I feel that the teacher needs to actually remember what it means to be a learner, and they should in all contexts be in that learning situation with their class in order to have an open dynamic and a
right.
porous system.
Couldn't
They
agree more.
And if they don't understand technology, then they should be learning that from their kids because they do understand it.
Right. Well, you just nailed how the uninformed are going to be dismissed. Okay, because technology is here, and the kids have the capacity. So if a teacher's deaf, dumb, and blind, it won't matter. It's what I said earlier. 30 years ago, we were Zooming,
Survival.
okay, and they were leaving the exhibit, making comments about, this is going to take our jobs. Well, 30 years later, it did. It has taken their jobs, and this just points out that the integer of the student is now more important because they have control of the content and the intentionality and the technology.
Hmm. The
And
one thing that I feel like when through all the years of going to school, which was many for me, like I feel like the one thing that I learned is that in the beginning, there's a guidance that's given through text to be a part of this kind of universal story that's going on where
mm,
we're creating like we are generating the history that we're making essentially or the
mm,
cities that we're creating or the and you start to learn and then you like for example looking at the books that looking at specific texts to be able to understand and contextualize like how we got to where we are like
right.
understanding going through the Greek to the like why did we start there and how did we get here and being a part of this larger story. I feel like that that's all that I learned in school is that they pointed out texts. But then oftentimes, like, so I still feel that it's valuable to be have people pointing out to you, oh, you should
Absolutely.
look here or you should look there, because there's stories that are embedded in those histories, etc., that help people to understand different things in life. And kids no matter what, even if they're on the internet learning, it's hard to, unless people really deep diving into how it all started and being a part of that conversation. That's the hard part to know.
Right.
But then kids can also learn it because there's everything, every book is a portal essentially that ends up, unpacking all these illusions if people are able to follow them.
Yeah, it's combinational without a doubt. So you have to have the fodder in order to feed. There's no question about that. Um, but again, kids also are very quick if they're
Yes,
given the materials. Okay, I mean, sense making is alive and well there.
absolutely.
Um, we typically give them nonsense, something that was generated because some curriculum demanded that you identify this as being an integral part of understanding. To what? Okay, so it all becomes something that is necessary relative to its spontaneity and the aspect of the conversation and or insight or intentionality, rather than a curriculum. I mean,
Yes, I remember the kids having these 400-page books about what was it? The topic was like these dragons or like these very amazing fantasy books
uh-huh.
that they were reading and I already knew that the level of reading was way beyond what they were reading in the classroom, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But again,
Yeah, we're
how
held hostage to the system, and
yeah.
the system was designed for something that no longer exists. And
And
fortunately, the kids have acquired um, um, new insights and new ways of thinking that that are not something that is conveyed on a daily basis in their existence, either with their parents or with people at school. But it's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's one of the more significant things. We don't know what that that world actually looks like, because they've coveted it and are existing in it, and we're not even aware of it.
Yes,
They're using the tools, I can assure you. To what
absolutely.
end, I have no idea. I have no idea. But we need to partner and figure that out and have some fun while we're doing it. There's nothing more exciting than a group of 7-year-olds and they're onto something. It's just
Have you guys ever seen the Van Matter's like acclimatization, the book? It's a book that it's like a an education book, but it's like a very small text that
what
talks about actually in the wilderness taking kids out and like learning about a bog, but they actually get inside of the water
there we
and
go.
explore it. And it has all these just lessons. It's a really good book. Van Matter is the name of the author, and it's called Acclimatization. That book I used to teach kids when I was a kid. I used to teach
Awesome.
kids.
Wow.
I used to go out and do these wilderness explorations, and it was very similar to that the movie I told you guys, Radical,
Uh-huh.
because it literally just let the kids really understand, like they would understand what that bog really was because they immersed themselves in it at every
Uh-huh.
level,
Right.
from seeing the different creatures that were flying like the on that water and all of it, and seeing the spiders inside all of it. Like they were asked to identify and come back with all that. And I remember in my own childhood, like I remember third grade, and science for me was the most exciting thing because I went to a Montessori school, and we
No,
actually went to rocks and pulled
you
crystal
went to
from the actual
Montessori.
rock. Yes,
Of
And
course you
yes.
did.
yeah, of course you did.
We would pull the clay out of the ground and then go make the pottery. So we would milk the goat and drink the milk.
Wow.
Like those kind of things, like from the source, are really important in doing the what acclimatization does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Big supporter of Montessori. Absolutely. If they get it right, a big
Yeah.
supporter. Yeah.
Love that. That's what the
Monica,
whole,
Monica, can you access the picture of the observatory
yeah.
really, rather quickly?
Yep.
So the observatory was located in Lake Angeles, which is the smallest city in the state of Michigan with the highest per capita income. It's the home of the Kresge estate and other such best kept secrets. So it sits on a lake, and what you're looking at is a solar observatory, and historically began with just the little low dome there on the foreground. And they had went to the University of Michigan, the University of um, Michigan State University, and said, you know, we're engineers. We build bridges for a living, but we're interested in astronomy, and we thought it'd be interesting back in 1920s to take motion pictures of the sun and the moon. And they said, you're crazy. And so they built this observatory, and they built the devices to shoot the motion picture of the sun and the moon. And then when they got the pictures of the sun and the moon, they went to the American Astronomical Society, and they showcased them. It
Oh
became
wow.
instantly famous. And then the U
Wow.
of M came to them and said what you typically hear when something like that happens is, why didn't you tell us that's what you were talking about?
Oh my
And
God.
they enjoyed a joint venture, the University of Michigan, they enjoyed a joint venture until the 1960s, in which they decommissioned and walked away from it. But it was the first um, solar observatory to shoot motion pictures of the sun and the moon. And so I spent 15 years there and I would bring kids over to the observatory, and we would immerse ourselves in the forest, in the lake. And you were talking about Montessori, and you were talking about experiential opportunities that teach in ways that no book can.
Right.
And I would have kids from Pontiac come there, and they were just scared to death to be in the woods
Oh, wow.
because they had never had any personal experiences of ever having been in the woods before. So of course that was a very, very scary moment. But once we established that there was a dinosaur dig out in the woods, it changed the whole world. Okay, because the thrill of going to the dinosaur dig was much easier to face than the fear of the woods itself. So as an example of experiential opportunities, if you can make it imaginative, you can change kids' theories about something they don't understand rather quickly when they're moved by their emotion. And if you can,
Another one of those is like we were at out in the Hudson River Valley with kids from the Bronx, and they had that same fear that you're describing. And one time I just asked if we could go off like book and essentially go for a real hike where it was like we were going to go camp in the wilderness. And the bonding experience, we never ended up doing it because everybody was so scared, but the bonding experience of walking far, like
right,
doing this long hike, actually changed the dynamic of everybody. And it was just the actual experience of having to have the labor of walking and
right.
having to bond to people through the walk that they would, I mean, these kids would fight constantly, but they stopped
It,
after this walk. It literally changed their,
the learning that was going
yeah,
on. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's something I really miss is the day-to-day content of discovery that imaginations untethered produce.
yes.
I mean,
We're getting back around to that.
yeah. Uh,
We had
so
to we had to do the environments. You couldn't be only there.
so we have the unique situation in Michigan of the governor having written this report in outing education, although for the wrong reason, but still outing education. And so everybody's now trying to figure out how to hide from it and or do something about it, depending on what camp you're in. And we're thinking that that kind of opportunity doesn't exist everywhere, but it exists here. And we're dealing with the state rep in Pontiac, who was actually part and parcel of having orchestrated the report. So we know that she would love it, and she just got reelected. So she can probably collect some value from a serious efforting that would go to those kinds of agendas that currently are unavailable. I mean, they don't exist out there. So we've got a number of organizations. We just went and did a little stand up with the Michigan After School Association,
Mm-hmm.
in which we were going to have a discussion. And this was 3 weeks ago. We were going to have a discussion around the Michigan Growing Together report. And so, we had I think 20 people in our particular room that we were assigned at the Westin Hotel and so forth and so on, along with our friend and courageous teacher Pat Wiley. And so it came time for Pat to make her presentation. She made her presentation, then she got to the point where she was going to hand it to me, and she handed it to me, and I asked this question. So how many of you are familiar with the Growing Michigan Together report on education? One person. And you're going, whoa, wait a minute. we're here at Michigan After School, okay, which is supposedly something that's not the alternative, which is an alternative to traditional education, and yet nobody knows anything about what's happening in education. And so there was no way to enter into conversation because there was no one familiar with the body of work, and we had an hour, and Pat needed to get her mission accomplished, and so we folded. But now we're trying to get something started with them. And strangely enough, there was also the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, the 21st Century CLC, was also at this meeting. And the 21st Century CLC is a federal program, but it began way back in the 90s with the Mott Foundation in Flint. And we got the first grant for $5 million for Pontiac schools. And they've been drawing on that now, about $1 million a year for 20 years, because they handed it off to the federal government. So it's become something really interesting and exciting since we got the first grant from the Mott Foundation, and it was all about technology. And so the $5 million that Pontiac schools got at that time, the thinking was we were going to use those to provide devices, PictureTel devices, which were $50,000 instruments, which gave you a connectivity with a screen and a television and two-way communications and so forth and so on. None of that ever happened. But nonetheless, today, that's all happened. So we're thinking of revisiting our friends at the 21st Century Community Learning Centers organization and see if we can't get a reinvention, because although technology at that time was the principle, today, 25 years later, 30 years later, that's technology just for technology's sake is meaningless. But technology in the fashion that we're talking about, utilizing digital learning and real-time integration and sticky notes, is a whole nother story about technology. And they're looking very desperately for ways in which to engage technology, but really what they lack is any imagination nor any visual system to allow kids to use their imaginations and creativity, but rather they would just allow them to sift around through the current curriculum offerings, et cetera, et cetera. If you go look at what technology's out there for education, there's not much. So we're thinking we can maybe get this 21st Century Community Learning Centers to participate in some fashion or another, because they have the network. That network is 25 years old, and it's all around the country, and it's sponsored by the federal government. So don't attempt to reinvent the wheel. Use the wheel and steer it in a different direction. So we're really interested and excited about that possibility.
That sounds great.
When we stop this, that's our next objective. There is a grant here in downtown Detroit that is interested in getting a new tool for education, and we think we have a tool for them. We're going to explore that between now and December the 6th. Would you like to join us in that kind of thing?
You have to give me more info as it gets closer to what the exact thing you're gonna.
We'll send you the materials. We don't know that we can write that deeply right now between now and then, but we sure can create a visual demonstration. And so we're thinking of more along those lines than we are along the lines of, I'm going to write this treatise, deep and wide and up and down and left and right, going nowhere. And what's really exciting is the players that are involved in this particular offering is everybody in the state of Michigan, and particularly in the city of Detroit, as a nonprofit proposition for funding for these things is involved in this particular offering. It's a who's who, and so we're really excited about that. And we think the timing's right. The desperation. If the state was in trouble at 42nd, imagine Detroit or Pontiac. I mean, there's just nothing there, and there's not going to be anything there because it's all about how much money it would cost to do the wrong thing and scale it. Okay, so we think we can provide something more challenging in that it's free and you either believe in the product, namely the kids, or you don't. If you don't, that's okay. We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the mission for the next week or two, to figure that out, and, send it up the river and back, see what happens. But we'd love to have you involved because you carry a tremendous asset in the way in which you think, in the way in which you are willing to chase the uncaptured possibility, which is a rare trait. Okay.
We also have a connection to the Girl Scouts. I think that the Soul Making Taylor project, there's all kinds of studies around when kids, how do we get girls into STEM? And it always shows up that do something meaningful in the community or something engaging, some like placemaking, those things, that's just a given. And I think that Girl Scouts would be a good partner project for this. Maybe they will want to participate in friendship bracelet design.
I actually met someone, and I've got to get a thing with him. But they're doing placemaking in schools in a way that I've not seen any other groups doing, and it's really, really interesting. And I have to we have to put a webinar with him in it so that he can explain, because he was in a panel with me in when I was in Baltimore.
And
At the
where's he
last
at? He's in Baltimore?
No, I was in a panel with him, but
Oh.
they have an educational program where placemaking it's in the schools, it's in all the schools. So I thought it was fascinating, and I want to be able to show what he's doing. I
Where
don't
is it?
actually know. I don't know exactly. I
Oh,
don't remember
okay.
right now. I
Yeah.
just know that it's one of the things that I was really surprised by, because it gets
So
there's a curriculum.
So he's doing value creation in the school.
Where the kids are creating all these different
Yeah.
projects, etc. It's really powerful. So yeah, I need to find that because it would go along with what you're describing right now.
Wow. That would be cool.
That's
That would be
beautiful.
cool. An existing program. I know. Are you familiar with Getting Smart?
No.
Tom Vander Ark and in the work that he's been doing for 30 years.
Please send me some information about
Yeah.
it. I
Um,
actually have to leave right now, but I hope that can you send me some follow-up?
yes. And then we'll keep you apprised as we move
I
towards
tried to
that
find the
December
book.
6th.
I tried to find the placemaking for education book we're modeling, but I don't have it on me, but we'll send it.
I just pull it aside because I would like to I'm going to do a placemaking US webinar about education. I got to find that guy's name, and there's a few other people, and I've been having it in the works, but I haven't executed it. Where we have a talk about just specifically around education and placemaking.
Well, I think that's just that's the perfect transition and transformation in terms of demonstrating value creation. Because the return on that is dramatic, because what we've lost, nobody in the last 5 decades have been active in their communities. And the way in which to become active is to do something in your community.
Well, you guys, I mean, just so I know, like we'll put together a webinar. I'll pull it together, and like I think it's a good time. Maybe we'll do it at the beginning of January or something, beginning of the year, and and just pull together your information, which I know you have it already, but on education and something to present that's like, takes
Yep.
7 minutes or so that you can actually share. And
Yep.
I'll pull the other people together and then we can have a conversation around that.
Awesome. Awesome.
That's awesome. All
All
right.
right. Hey,
Okay,
Have a
we'll be
great day.
working toward sifting and winnowing all of this body of knowledge and maybe starting a new board, fresh board for Vancouver.
yeah.
Okay.
And then you
Yeah.
could share it across anyone else, and if a team or something, if we could even just find the right, we've got the program, I believe.
Just the ingredients, the recipe. Yeah.
And I'll be
Okay.
exploring too some connections, some old Northwest friends I'll explore.
Well, you got your thing down in New Orleans that you came back with as well.
Yes.
Plus, you
Yes.
have the two organizations that are doing work in their communities and yet haven't recognized placemaking as a vehicle.
Yeah, and I still haven't even tagged some of these TikTok creators that are used in the essay, and that they came up with certain theories, and just say, okay, I rounded it out a little bit more. And there's a lot of ways to sort of,
Connect.
connect to that
Okay.
All right.
universe. Okay, bye,
Too much fun.
Madeline. This was beautiful.
Bye.
Thank you
Peace.
so much.
Be safe.
You too.
Bye.
Love the hat.
Yes. Yes. Happy accident. Okay, I'm just gonna shut it down here.